What is good technique?
God, straight in there with that. You've been listening to all the Chris Williamson podcasts, right? No intro, just straight in with a deep question. What is technique? Technique is the way that you do something. It's the method employed to achieve a task. At least that's
Oh,
my definition of it.
okay.
So, you see different techniques on tour. You see players with stronger grips, weaker grips, bowed wrists, cupped wrists, laid off, across the line, steeper club shafts, flatter club shafts, steeper lead arms, flatter lead arms. There are commonalities with the best players in the world as well. But you could say that, okay, well, if there are commonalities, then maybe introducing those things into our swing are going to make us better. And there's a truth to that. But also, I mean, you could look at it. I went to a Cirque du Soleil show the other day and looking at them bend their bodies and say, oh, if I bend my body that way, I'm going to be a Cirque du Soleil person. It's like, no, they're built different. And so sometimes we can try and implement things that pros are doing that maybe our bodies can't do, or maybe we're not ready for it. Or maybe, the analogy I would use for that would be hammering a nail. The technique that you employ might change as you evolve and your skills and coordination evolve. If you give a beginner a hammer and a nail, they're going to use a very locked in method. The wrist is going to be locked. And there's a reason for that. Now that person could look at an advanced blacksmith and say, well, look at those guys. They're using their wrist more, they're using their arm more, there's more freedom in the shoulder. And then that beginner goes and tries it and smacks their thumb because they don't have the coordination yet for that. So I mean there's a theory in motor learning that's been, I don't want to say proven, but yeah, as you develop, degrees of freedom unlock. So as I say, you might start out with something more rigid, and then you start to get into a more flowing state over time as you develop. So yeah, I mean that's a good branching off topic, right? There's good
Yeah.
things, bad things, pro technique, maybe amateur technique. Another
Yeah.
thing on that is, I very early on in my career used to be pretty good at getting people to look like the pros on the camera. So you used to have like Tiger hitting a nice low flighted shot, and I would get Mrs. Haverkamp to do that with her 30-mile-an-hour club speed, and the ball wouldn't get up in the air at all. And then I quickly realized, oh, maybe an earlier release for an amateur or someone with slow speed is actually a more optimal technique, even though none of the pros do it. So, yeah.
Okay. So so to say good technique is there's no finish, there's no end to that sentence, or at least there's no consistent end.
Yeah, I'm looking for answers in that constantly. I think there are techniques that, if you do them, could offer lower margins for error. So, I try and categorize technique things into uh, what is more stylistic element, like a Jim Furyk backswing is more of a stylistic thing. It didn't hurt, his ability to play golf, as his $70 million winnings would say.
Not bad.
Yeah. Um, and then there are things that are far more functional. So a simple example of that would be having the lowest point of your swing in front of the ball with an iron is going to give you better results than having it behind the ball. Why? Because we all have some variation in our swings, right? If you make 100 swings, there's going to be, sometimes you're a little deeper, sometimes you're a little higher, sometimes you're a little bit more behind it, sometimes you're a little bit more in front. So that's what I call biological consistency, how much variation is within the system. And then something that I call technical consistency would be how much can you get away with that movement variability. So say, for example, we have two people. One of them has a low point in front of the ball and one of them has a low point behind the ball, and they both make one swing where they strike the ball pretty well. Now, if on the next swing you drop both of them an eighth of an inch deeper, the guy who had the low point in front of the ball will still hit a decent shot. The guy who had the low point behind the ball will now hit a chunk that goes 30 yards. And in terms of strokes gained, there might be like almost a full shot of strokes lost for the same error, the same input error by the person. So there are ways of increasing, maybe you call it mechanical advantage, taking that variability that's in all of us and reducing the effects or nullifying the effects of that variability.
Right. So there's a few, well, I don't know about a few. You've named one, I guess low point would be the one to summarize that one into a term. That's one of the things that actually could finish the sentence is good technique is good low point. Like, is that fair?
Yeah, yeah. And to be honest, there aren't that many that
Okay.
we've discovered.
Okay.
There are some theories out there. Another one that I've looked into geometry-wise, I've never seen someone go as deep into this, is shaft lean as well, or dynamic loft. So, you look at, in terms of correlation, you look at all the best players, and yeah, they do have forward shaft lean. And you'd say, well, why? What's the purpose of that? And what I found is that for every 10 degrees of forward shaft lean you get, it moves the strike up the face by about one groove, which doesn't
Hmm.
sound like much at all. But that one groove can mean the difference in an inch of ground contact. So I've done some simulations where I get a player to come in with 0 shaft lean. So, clubs straight up and down, and then 10 degrees of forward shaft lean. And basically the forward shaft leaning one allows the player to swing a little higher through impact and still achieve a good result. So they basically got more clearance from the ground. And then that gives them the opportunity to drop a groove deeper accidentally and still hit a good shot. And so for each groove is an inch of ground contact. So again, you imagine the player who has 10 degrees of forward shaft lean and the player who doesn't. If they both drop one groove in, the player with forward shaft lean might hit an inch behind and it'll still be okay. They're just contacting the ground. I'm not saying starting a divot, but it just starts to connect with the ground an inch behind. But the no shaft lean person will contact 2 inches behind. And so again, there's a huge difference. I've done this where I hit 20 shots, hitting 0, hitting an inch behind, 2 inches behind, 3 inches behind. I was going to do 4 inches behind as well, but it's pointless because once you 2 inches behind
Gonna hurt
drops
yourself.
so much distance off. Yeah, there's a huge difference between hitting an inch behind and 2 inches behind.
Yeah.
And so that, forward shaft lean is another thing where, if I have a low point in front and I have forward shaft lean, now I'm really increasing my margin for error here. And then you look at all
Yeah.
the best players in the world and they all have those traits. Now, there are trade-offs as well. You might improve strike quality by having forward shaft lean and low point in front, but the trade-off is the shot height. You're going to get a lower ball flight, and if you don't have a lot of speed, that can be hard to manage, and so you might get good quality strikes, but you can't hold a green. The pros don't have to worry about that because they have so much speed that they get the best of both worlds. So yeah, it's you're constantly managing these things as a professional, as a coach.
So maybe good technique is margin for error.
Yeah, that's how I would define it. Yeah. So, when I look at consistency, I looked at things like biological consistency, which is, how can we reduce the movement error? So, so if I make 100 swings, what's my range of difference in it between the highest and lowest of those swings? So we could look to reduce that. That's an interesting one as well, because sometimes reducing movement doesn't increase that consistency. We can talk about that in a moment. You have to
Yeah.
remind me of that. But the
Yeah.
other one is then I lump it under technical consistency, which you'd call margin for error. Then I have things like strategic consistency as well. So, Scott Fawcett has done an awesome job of popularizing this
Systematizing it.
concept.
Right.
If you have a certain spread of shots, 20 yards left to 20 yards right with an iron going into a green, there is a way of picking a target that will maximize the mathematical or minimize the mathematical score
Right.
without having to change your technique at all. It's just literally
Yeah.
taking those probabilities. If you hit 30% left, 30% right, and 40% in the middle, taking those probabilities and overlaying it onto the whole in a way that gives you the best outcome if you were to play it 10, 20, 100 times. And then if you
Yes.
do that over the course of a round, a tournament, you're going to get the lowest scores with that. So that's strategic consistency.
Right. Is there any more of these consistencies? We've got biological, technical, strategic.
Yeah, there are. I haven't thought about it in a while. I've only had one coffee down me as well today. I mean, one of them would be this is way out of my realm, but equipment consistency. So I think guys like Sasha McKenzie have done a lot of work on different shafts and the inputs that the player would make. The shaft can respond differently. So, say you make 10 swings, swinging at a certain speed, acceleration profile, and then one swing, you swing a little bit faster. With one shaft, that club might not change the impact as much, whereas another club, that little bit of extra force might take it over a tipping point with that shaft, and it produces a completely wildly different outcome at the bottom of the swing. I don't know too much about that, but, I think that shaft fitting, if you can get something that produces a more consistent outcome, I don't know how clear the science is on that. I think a lot of club fitting, from what I hear, is very much let's try this and just see what works for us. The other one, I suppose this ties in a little bit with biological consistency, is our ability to consciously control things. So one of the real counterintuitive things to consistency is that I'm more consistent because I'm less consistent. And what does that mean? Well, if I turn up for a round of golf and I'm warming up and I'm hitting out of the heel for whatever reason, maybe throwing a few S words in there, I can change that very quickly. So my ability to change things, which is effectively inconsistency, right? I can take a heel pattern and move it in the right direction through conscious control, through intent. That allows me to take a bad day, bad round, bad shot, bad pattern, and turn it into something that's much manageable. Whereas someone who is more consistent, and I would actually put people into the category where they're too consistent. Most people are too consistent. Whoa. They will be hitting a poor pattern and they won't know how to or have the ability to change it. And even if they do, they won't have the ability to do it in the right amount. So, say you've got a guy who's slice, 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 slice. I could say to them, I could put a gun to their head and say, look, hit one off the planet left for me. And they might be able to do that, but they can't control the amount to turn a slice into a straight shot. Right. So that then goes into, well, how do we train so that we become more adaptable and we can control the amount of the adaptation as well? So if we're hitting it thin one day, how do we make it less thin in the right dosage? How do we make that ball go less to the right in the correct dosage? How do we move a heel pattern more towards the center, so in the right dosage? And those are skills that I teach effectively. When I'm taking a player through, it's interesting. Someone asked me the other day, how do you do online lessons? Like, the difficulty with online lessons or just coaching in general is it's so much about the process, and it's not just about the information. And this is true. So I'm constantly asking players to see where they are in their journey. Like, the first thing I want to know with a player is, do they know what creates a good shot? So it's kind of different levels here. Do they know what creates a good shot? And most people will just say random things like, oh, is it a good grip? Is it a good stance? Is it a good posture? Yeah, good technique. But they're picking often stylistic elements, right? Because you'd have to say, well, what is a good grip? Is Dustin Johnson's grip not good? Is Colin Morikawa's grip not good? Or Bryson DeChambeau? They all have super different grips. Yet you'd be a fool to argue that they're wrong to grip it that way. They're just, it's a stylistic element. Is the grip important? Of course. Don't just go out there and grip anyway. But there will be a grip that will match a person and what they're currently doing. Or a grip is a tool to be able to help you as a player navigate the golf course. So my grip actually changes slightly from day to day. If I'm hitting it left one day, I'll place my hand a little bit more on top of the club with my right hand. And if I'm hitting it right one day, I'll place it a little bit more under. So my grip subtly changes from day to day, maybe even during the round. I'm suffering with a little bit of a hip injury at the moment. And when I was playing the other day, I started out good. I could swing through aggressively so I could use my normal grip. But as I continued through the round, my hip started to hurt, which changed the aggression of my swing. So, things started to change. My hands started to overtake. The ball started to go left. But that's not a problem for me because I see the ball going left and I can say, right, I just have to do something to open the face. I could weaken off my grip position because it's a tried and tested tool for me. So it's more, adapting to yourself, adapting to the body, adapting to the patterns that you have. But yeah, to that journey that I'm taking golfers through.
Yeah.
You can see that I go through all different random tangents, but I managed to bring myself back on this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, the first thing is, does a player know what creates a good shot?
Right.
And the reality is, I've personally boiled it down to two main things. Number one is hit the ground in the right place. So a drill that I often do for players to highlight this is draw a little X on a slab of concrete. And with an old club, I'll just say, here, hit that X for me. Make a swing and just lightly clip it. So we hear a click and we'll see on the concrete where you're chipping it. Obviously, if you start that contact too far behind the X, that's a fat shot. If you start the contact too far in front or you miss the ground completely, that's a thin contact. So getting closer to that X is better. And if you hit the ground too close to your feet, that's a toe contact. Too far away from your feet is a heel contact. So your ability to hit that X actually covers fat shots, thin shots, and toe and heel. So just that one task there. If you were stuck on a desert island and that's the only task I could give someone, I would give them that and come back 10 years later and they'd be a pretty good golfer. The second thing then is if you add on the knowledge that the club face direction at impact is the predominant determinant of the overall direction of the shot, then these two rules, hit the X with a decent club face location, will solve 90% of your problems. And when a player makes a mistake on the golf course, it's almost always lumped into one of those two categories. Sometimes I separate the toe and heel and fat and thin into other things. So we call that in our podcast the big three: ground contact, face direction.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's the Pareto principle of golf. 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of your efforts. I'd say even more so. So I monitor these things with players on the golf course. After they hit a bad shot, I'll say, what could you have done to get better, to get a better shot there? In any technical fault, it's going to be one of those three things usually. Par, people obsess over it, but it doesn't really change that much from swing to swing. Like I'll put people on a GC quad or TrackMan and their path barely changes by a degree or so. It's not enough to make a meaningful effect to the outcome. So, I mean, you can have your path 1 degree either side and still hit a tour level golf shot, but the face variation is much more powerful for changing the direction, and it also is more variable. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that you've ever posted was the one where you show a driver and it's if you just change it by a degree, which is imperceptible to the naked eye, let alone at 100 miles an hour, how much that changes the outcome. And then 2 degrees, which is pretty much still imperceptible, how much that changes the outcome. So that 2 degree difference would change more than 2 degrees path, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I've done some of the math with a driver, and a 1 degree face change versus a 1 degree path change. The face change will have a 50% greater effect. And I need to redo the math or at least revise it. I think as you go down through the bag, it's even a greater percentage. So as you go to like a 7-iron, the face is a greater percentage.
Really?
And then when you add on the fact that face changes more than path, so face has a greater effect on the outcome and it changes more generally for people. Usually it's twice as variable. Then, yeah, you can pretty much have a safe argument. And the other thing as well is when someone does change their path, like say you get 100 golfers and you make them all swing more left, usually they don't just change the path in isolation. They'll usually drag the face with it a little bit as well. So yeah, when someone's path changes, even if it changed in isolation, it would have a 50% less effect than the face. But it usually doesn't change in isolation. Usually it drags the face, which would actually help you a little bit. So path changes, yeah, I don't feel like they're the biggest error. The only caveat to that I would say is if someone has poor alignment or inconsistent alignment, it's not the swing that's changing there, but just someone's ability to set up consistently would have the effect there. So yeah, I'd monitor those things as well.
I want to take a brief moment to talk about the Divot Board. The Divot Board is the all-in-one training aid designed to help you maximize the effectiveness of your practice. What is the Divot Board? Well, it's basically a rectangle hitting mat that has probably thousands of sequins on it that when you hit the ball, the sequins flip over and it shows you the exact divot that you made. And it has a yellow circle right in the middle. You put your golf ball right there, you make a swing, make contact with the ball, and you can see exactly what your club did as it made impact with the ball. Did you hit behind it by an inch? Did you hit in front of it by an inch? Something Adam Young talks about a lot is ground contact, face angle, swing path. You can see all of these things using the Divot Board, and you can get that feedback instantly. And as we know here on the Mental Golf Show, the value of instantaneous feedback is massive on the brain's ability to learn and adapt. If you get those errors quickly, then your brain can adapt quickly and make changes. So the Divot Board is my probably top 2 training aids. I have a putting training aid and I have a swing training aid. And the swing training aid is the Divot Board. So when I say that it is an awesome training aid, I don't use those words lightly. I love the Divot Board. So how can you get the Divot Board? You can go to divotboard.com/mentalgolfshow and you can use the discount code mentalgolf10 at checkout and you can get 10% off of your entire order. You could get any of the products that they have on there. They actually just started selling a kind of an integrated entire standing hitting mat with regular golf turf on it. It has an insert where you can put your Divot Board into it. So it's kind of an integrated whole thing, which is awesome. It's a product that I would love to try someday, would love to get and put in my backyard. So you can get any of that at a 10% discount by going to divotboard.com/mentalgolfshow and using the discount code mentalgolf10 at checkout. Thank you to the Divot Board for being a partner of the Mental Golf Show. Let's get back into the episode. To throw as many swing instructors under the bus as you possibly can, how many swing lessons do you think you're working on the 80% that just doesn't move the needle? You're basically working on not pointless stuff maybe, but maybe pointless. Like how often do you think that happens?
I think the only way of knowing it would be to clone everybody and run the test.
Instructor.
I think historically instruction has been like a rain dance. It's like, oh, we'll just do this, this, and this, and then hope that rain falls, or the swing gets better, or that the outcomes get better. And I think certainly when I was learning golf, it was a bit of a mystery. What is actually creating the shot? I didn't know those answers. If you asked me 30 years ago when I was learning what creates a good golf shot, I'm like, well, isn't it position A? Your takeaway has to be good, your backswing. But I spent my entire life putting myself into those positions. And I would put, even as a 15-year-old, I was recording my swing. I was recording Tiger's swing, freeze framing it, drawing lines on the TV screen, then copying it in the reflection of the window at night while my parents were out, so they didn't see me almost hit the chandeliers. And I got pretty good at putting myself into positions, and my game didn't get better. In fact, it got worse. And I'm like, well, I can't see how this is happening. I look like Tiger at the top of the swing, yet I'm hitting it worse. What is it that Tiger has that is making his ball go like that? Years later, I come to find out, well, it's actually all about impact. And, there are 7 laws that determine the shot outcome. As we talked about 3: ground contact, face direction. Path will determine like the curvature of the shot. It doesn't have to be neutral or anything like that. You have players who fade it on tour, draw it on the tour. So I think that, it's an important thing. You don't want it to be too far out of whack, but it doesn't have to be iced. Then you have speed. So, why did Tiger hit it so far? Well, he had 120 mile an hour or 130 mile an hour swing speed. I had 100. As crazy as it is to say that now, I think most people are well versed on that now. But honestly, when I was learning golf, we didn't realize these things. So these things were important.
Yeah.
And even with a certain speed, you can kind of cheat the system. So even though my speed is very low, I'm not a gifted athlete, right? I'm 5'8", and I throw like, I can't throw a ball very far. When it's embarrassing, if I'm teaching juniors and we're doing like tasks where we're throwing a ball, you get a 12-year-old kid who can throw it 60 yards past me. I'm not a gifted athlete. So my swing speed has always kind of been capped out in the 100, 105 mile an hour range. But you can then, with the other laws, this angle of attack and dynamic loft, with the driver in particular, you can do certain things to help the ball launch higher, spin less, and you can, I can get 20, 30 yards more out of my swing than someone who's using a typical technique. The first people see, when they see my ball flight with the driver, the first thing they say is, wow, you launch it high. And I said, that's actually optimal. They think I sky it the first time I hit it.
Really?
Like, what,
Okay.
did you just sky that? I'm like, no, that's 18-degree launch with 1700 spin. That's going to maximize distance. And so I can kind of keep up with guys who have 110 mile an hour club speed. I would love to do what I do with 130, and that's pretty much what Rory does. That's why he blasts it out there 340. Unfortunately, I'm not gifted with his genetics, but I've got the intellectual part of it, the technique part of it as well. So, yeah, those are the 7 laws: ground contact, face direction, path, speed, angle of attack, dynamic loft. Any answer you are looking for as to why the ball flew that way will be found within those. And as I said, for the most people, they just need to focus on those 3 things that I talked about.
Right,
ground
the big
contact, face direction, which could even be lumped into 2 if you want to lump ground contact and face contact into hit the X. So yeah, golf simplified for me is hit the X with a good face direction. So whenever if I post something on social media, because I go down rabbit holes and I start talking about differential practice, mode learning concepts, uncontrolled manifold hypothesis, and someone will say to me, this is way too complicated, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, well, read this blog I have here, Golf Simplified. Hit the X with a good face direction. Inevitably, they obviously say, oh, it's way too simple, but you can't please everybody.
You can't please everybody. Okay, so why have all the complex stuff? If it is just hit the X, why have all the complex stuff?
Well, I think you can branch out into complexity after that. It's like, what's the Einstein quote about? I don't want to quote myself as being a genius, but the whole a genius is someone who can take something and simplify it down into something that's very functional. It doesn't lose. Obviously, you're going to lose certain amounts of information when you simplify it down into hit the X with this face. But then you can, that's the next task. Is I said, well, if this is like the universal goal, hit the X with a good face direction, what are the different ways I can use to improve that with a player? And technique is one of those tools as an instructor. I can say that, because it's just geometry, if you get a player and they make the exact same swing, but you shift them forwards an inch, the ground contact will be an inch farther forwards. I often do these thought experiments where I'm thinking in terms of like an iron Byron, a golf robot. It's like, well, what if I move the robot this way, this way, this way? How would that affect impact? And so, if you take a player who's relatively consistent, for example, say they're hitting consistent shanks. Well, what would you do with a golf robot if it was hitting consistent shanks? I mean, you could try and reprogram the whole robot, or you could just set that robot up out of the toe a little bit.
Right.
And that would produce consistent centered shots then. Because if the club keeps creeping out away from you, well, do you have to reprogram the robot, or can you just use a simple thing? Not the irony, I suppose, but most people would argue, but that's the wrong way of doing it. And I would have argued that as well 30 years ago. But now I just think, well, why? Give me a good logical reason to why you can't just set up out of the toe of the club. And then, look, there's Annika Sorenstam setting up out of the heel of the club. Here's Vijay Singh setting up out of the heel of the club. Here's Jack Johnson, Jack Johnson is the singer. Zach Johnson, he's setting up so far out of the toe, he looks like he's about to take a practice swing. In fact, because his club constantly works out away from him. That's
Yeah.
often caught him in trouble, right? Because
Yes.
he has the occasional one where he hits it in his practice swing, and luckily the rules allow for that.
Mm.
But yeah, does he need to change his entire motion, what he's ingrained, or can he just set about the toe? And his answer was, let's just set about the toe and rake in millions.
Right.
Whereas the average amateur would be very reluctant to take a shank and just set up by the toe. And in fact, that may not always work for people, because I've actually done a study on that. So I say study. My stuff is just all in the field. I'm just going to collect some data. It's not published or anything like that, but it does enough to help me drive my content and my thinking about this stuff. And so, yeah, I once took shankers of the golf ball, or basically, we'll just say for argument's sake, they're all shankers, but they were a mix of toe players. So if I took all these shankers and then I would ask half of them to just set up out of the toe, stand a little bit farther away from it and set up out of the toe. And then I watched them hit. And only about 30%, maybe a third would actually improve their strike. So if they were robots, all of them would improve. But only a third did. Lots of players found their way back to hitting the shank, and even some players shanked it worse. And I don't know the reason for it, but the guess is that when you put someone farther away from it, their initial thought is, oh my God, I'm too far away from this. I've never been this far away. And then they reach out and they exaggerate the fault. So just standing farther away on its own doesn't often change it, because there's also intent.
Yeah.
So then I tested with another group. Okay, what if I change the player's intent instead? So I asked another group, can you just try to hit it more out of the toe for me? And while there was a mix in people's ability to do this, the overall pattern for almost everybody moved towards the toe. You didn't see anybody move worse towards the heel. So I'm like, okay, so intent is more powerful than mechanics in a human. Just pure mechanics in a robot would work, but intent is driving a lot of the mechanics in humans. So I deal a lot with, okay, well, how can I harness this intent? So, different drills that I do where we're intentionally trying to hit too much on the toe, too much on the heel. And then I found out that by doing those drills with people are able to much better hit the center as they improve their intent. So intent is not just something that's static, it can be improved over time, or our coordination. And it even it changes as well. So, if I take someone who's shanking it, this happens occasionally, take someone who's shanking it, and then I spend an hour with them, let's try and hit the toe more. So I'll start out with maybe little swings, little chipping swings, maybe even putting swings if they need it, and we'll build up speed as they see success. So it's like the goal of, we got to get everyone on the toe half of the club. If you don't, you have to move back a level. If you get them all on the toe, we move forward a level. And they might struggle to do that task on the first day, maybe even on the second day. But sometimes on the third day, they'll come and they can't stop hitting it on the toe. They were a shanker a few days ago, and now they can't stop hitting on the toe. And so this is the idea of perceptual adaptation. So these things are not just static, our feel and our real, to put it in simple terms. They're dynamic. They're constantly shifting around. The goal might be the same for every single one of us, to hit the sweet spot. But the feel and the intent you use to create that may be different from player to player, and maybe even different from day to day. Or even, it rarely changes that one during a round. If someone starts out with a heel bias pattern, I can pretty much guarantee that that's going to be their pattern for the rest of the round. But I've seen it flip over the course of a day, a week, a year. Sure. And, for players listening who are like, I bought a new set of clubs a month ago and they were just brilliant, and now a month later I can't hit them. It's probably what's happened is your strike has changed. Your strike has shifted, and you don't have the ability to change that. I actually play with a guy who every time he starts playing bad, he goes out and buys a new set of clubs. And basically, he's got more money than sense, obviously. But basically what happens is he hits these clubs, and then one day his pattern shifts. Maybe it's more heely. He starts hitting them bad. His answer to that is, all right, I'm going to go out and get a new set of clubs. And that can work because he gets fit. They say, oh, these clubs are making you hit it heel. They change something in the weight, the torque, the droop, whatever. All of a sudden he starts hitting it centered, goes off, and he's like that until the pattern shifts again.
Yeah.
And so my answer to that is, well, don't buy clubs every time the pattern shifts. Learn how to take control of the pattern. through intent. I mean, if you've got unlimited money, I suppose you can just use the club thing every time, but
Right.
it could be hard. What if that pattern shifts mid-round, right? You can't, or if you start slicing it mid-round, you go off and you can't buy a new shaft mid-round. So you need to have this ability to adjust on the fly.
So that brings up a question that I actually get a lot, and I don't know that I have a great answer, but it seems like you would have a great answer, is, okay, I'm hitting it terrible today. Normally I hit this nice high fade, but today I've got a quick hook. And normally I hit it center of the face or maybe towards the heel, but today it's just off the toe a lot. And whether or not people out there can even relate to that example, it doesn't matter as much as, okay, that person is going through that today. And what you just said of, okay, intent can change, reliably over a year for sure, a week pretty reliably, maybe a day, but during a round, it's hard to change that intent. So for that player, do they stick with what they have, or do they try to make an adjustment and get it back to center or get it back to straight or fade?
It depends on where you are in the journey, which I never finished. But yeah, there's knowing what to do is one thing. So you're at the place where right, I've got to hit the center of the face, contact the ground in the right place, control the club face. The next level is, can you actually identify when something goes wrong, which one of those it was? Because some people can have the intellectual answers, yet when they hit a shot, they're not going through that mental process. They lump everything into, that was a good shot, that was a bad shot. Or I even have players often where they'll hit good shots and they'll say, yeah, that was good. It was just a little out of the toe. That was good as well, but it's a little out of the heel or a little thin. But then when they hit a bad shot, the process goes out the window. They hit a bad shot and they say, oh, just give me another ball. That was awful. I'm like, yeah, but what actually happened there? That's the most important thing. If your process goes out the window when you hit a bad shot, that's the time we need it most, is to just hit a bad shot and say, it was just thin. I need to dig in a little bit more for the next one. And so that's the next level is, okay, you know what creates a good shot. You can identify what you did. Now, do you have a tool or tools to implement to change that? So if you ask me, Adam, you're hitting it left one day, what could you do? I could give you 5, maybe 10 tools. I don't need all of those. I usually just have one. And then the next level of knowledge is, you got these tools, but you know which ones work well for you. So if I'm hitting it left, I could say, well, I could open the face at address. It's honestly as simple as that, the robot answer, right? That works for me. I can open the face at address and grip it. I could weaken off my right hand. I could weaken off my left hand. That for me works to stop going left. I could feel a more aggressive swing as well. This is a little bit, it's loosely tied to certain mechanics. So a more aggressive swing for me tends to get my arms lagging behind my body a little bit more. It's harder to supinate or rotate the wrist when you do that. I mean, the simple answer is if you get 100 people to hit it as hard as they can, most people end up flaring it out to the right. Not everybody, though. For me, I'm one of those people. So that's an answer as well. I could even use a strategic answer. I could just aim a little bit more to the right. And now from these answers, you could say, well, which one works best and under what situations? So I'm very comfortable aiming more to the right if I've got a small draw pattern, small left. But if my ball is hooking 40 yards left, I'm not very comfortable aiming off the green, really. So mentally, I can do it, but it's not the most comfortable thing. So if I have a big left pattern going, I might use something more mechanical, like a grip change. And even what I said about the right and the left hand, for me, a right hand grip change can be a more subtle adjustment for the outcome, whereas a left hand grip change for me has a much bigger effect on the outcome. Again, everybody's different with this stuff. I can predict reasonably what will work well for a player, but ultimately my process for most people is, let's test.
Yeah.
Here are some options. Let's test. And so, one of the things I'm trying to get with people is not only the knowledge of what they're doing, the awareness of what they're actually doing, the tools. We're building their toolbox. So I'm saying, okay, if you hit it left one day, what are you going to do? If they throw their arms up and say, I don't know, or they give me an answer that's awful, Like, oh, I'm hitting it left one day. I'm going to close the face more to address. Lots of people say that. It's like, okay, well, that's not a wrong. That's a wrong tool. So getting the right tools in place, getting tools. And then the next stage is, okay, how do we develop control over these tools? So, in terms of the directional one, I might set a task for people. I say, right, I want you to hit a big left, a medium left, and a small left using the tool of grip change. Or even maybe simpler than that. Let's close the face at address, varying amounts, to see if you can change and affect the outcome. And the first time I give them a big left, I actually use the finger system, like aim point for putting, and I just expanded that out to long game. So I say, right, do 2 fingers left, 4 fingers left, 6 fingers left. So their brain, as they're doing this, is attaching a feel to a number. And the first time someone does a 6-finger left, I'll say, hit 6 fingers left for me. And they're like, I don't know what that is. How much does that feel? And it's like, well, we're going to find out. The first one, they hit it 10 fingers left. And I'll say, okay, well, so it's less than that. Next one, they hit it 2 fingers left. So because there's a little bit more than that. And then they get 6 fingers left. I'm like, right, you found that feel. See if you can lock onto it for a few shots. And they're like, okay, this is what 6 fingers left would feel like. All right, now do 4. Now do 2. Then let's do the right end of the spectrum. So now when they walk away from that first session, they not only know how to manipulate the ball more right and left. Consciously control is probably a better phrase than manipulate. I think it had connotations with that. But yeah, consciously control the direction, but they can do so in specific amounts. So that's the part I call dosage. Right, implementing things in the right amount. And the more you do that, the more you go through that, you just gain better and better control. And then you can start to do smaller levels of the scale. With face strike, for example, a beginner task might be, I want you to hit between 0 and 25 millimeters toe, and then 0 and 25 millimeters heel with a putting swing. It's a super simple task, and there's a big window. Whereas when I get an elite player, I might be saying, I want you to hit between 3 and 6 millimeters toe, and then 3 and 6 millimeters heel. So that's basically 3 millimeters is about groove width. So, and I have players who can do that with like an 80% success rate, so they can control it. And they didn't start that way, but as they do these tasks, as they do these exercises, they gain control of hitting different windows on the face, or hitting different directional windows, or hitting even different grooves on the face vertically. And then as you can maneuver these things and consciously control them more one way, more the other, it becomes very easy to then do what you want. So when I ask those players, okay, let's go back to hitting the center again, they can now do it. And every shot that isn't as desired, they can maneuver it just a little back and forth. So this is then the calibration phase. Right. So we have, I would say, different types of training. We've got experimental, which is exploring the scale that we have, left, right, toe, heel, higher, lower on the face. That's exploring the scale actively. No one does that unless they're a pupil of mine, and then I force them to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the calibration approach, which is, okay, let's go for our desired shot here, but make constant subtle tweaks or calibrations until it's as desired. So in calibration, I might hit a shot and I would say, okay, that was good, but it was 1 finger left. I'm going to try and feel like the face is a little bit more open for the next one. Then I hit a shot and I go, oh, I've opened it too much. That went 1 finger right. Let's try and feel something in between. So when you're doing calibration, out of 100 shots, you might only get 5 that are as desired, but you're constantly going through that subtle manipulation or calibration of the outcome. And it's much easier to do that if you have the feels for the entire spectrum.
So the purpose of this, maybe in your view, and I'm asking, is you start out your round hitting some quick hooks, or you're hitting it 6 fingers left, maybe even 10 fingers left.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get it back to 0 fingers, right? Or fewer fingers left. Does a player, assuming that feels neutral, right? I'm just swinging and it's going 10 fingers left. Does that mean I need to feel 6 fingers right in order to move it from 10 fingers left to 4 fingers left?
Yeah, the golden rule is take the fault and feel the opposite. So if you're going left, the face is closed too much, you need to do something to present the face more open. The hard part that's going to be different for everybody is what's your ability to do that? You
Yeah,
know,
of course.
you can't suddenly learn those skills on the golf course. This is why I do these things, these training drills. It's like it's preparing for every eventuality really on the range through exploration and play. But yeah, then there are lots of mental elements with doing the right dosage, right? Do I know how to open the face more if I've got this quick hook? Do I know how to do it in the right amount? And then there are other things which are more in your domain, which would probably be the level that I'm at. I call this the final frontier, where you know everything about it and you can do it. You ask me to hit it more right, I can hit it more right. You ask me to do it in a certain amount, I can do that. But there's this fear in the back of the head of, oh, well, I don't want to overdo it.
Right.
If I've got a left pattern going, okay, well, I can open the face, but I don't want to do it so much that I bring in the right pattern. So then it's just it's managing these fears, and again, the way around that is still the same tasks, right? The 2, 4, 6 finger right and left drills to develop more comfort with that. But then putting it into the battleground can be the hardest thing, right? Because there are consequences now to not doing something the correct amount, and that's the part where the only answer to that, I think, really is playing more. But you're now playing. It's not just playing and hoping things figure out. You're playing and you're implementing strategies to improve your game. It's like every single shot I hit, I'm analyzing, right, where did that go? Do I need to change it for the next one? How much do I need to change it for the next one? You know, there are other mental things like if I hit one left, well, do I really need to change the next one? Because that could just be an anomalous result. It could just be one thing that happened. So I'm looking at patterns. One shot left, I don't worry about it too much, unless it's a huge left. If it's 6 fingers left, 8 fingers left, then yeah, I'm going to change for the next one. If it's 2 fingers, 4 fingers left, I might be a little cautious. I might say, right, let's play a few more shots with this club. Next hole goes a little bit left. I'm like, okay, there's a little pattern there. So I'm looking now at the averages. So yeah, I might change if there's one big shot, I might change for that based on the next shot.
Yeah.
Or if there's a definite pattern there. I suppose one thing I should mention here, lots of people listening might say, well, how are you changing for a left shot? What are you doing in mid downswing?
Right.
I'm like, no, what you're using is the last shot. So the process here is you're using the last shot that you hit, and you're predicting that that's going to happen for the next one. If your last shot was left, there's a good chance that your next shot is going to be left, unless you change something, because people are very consistent. And so, yeah, I get people all the time come for lessons. They say, oh, I just want to be more consistent. And you put them on the GC quad and you see, well, everything's 20 millimeters out the heel. And they're like, yeah, but look, I hit 10 shots straight and then 3 shots went 90 degrees right. I'm like, yeah, those ones that went 90 degrees right were shanks. So it's your good shots are 20 millimeters from the heel. Your bad shots are 23 millimeters from the heel, clipping the shank and going to the right. So it's not an inconsistency issue. Your inputs as a player are very consistent there, but the outputs are not consistent. So then I would say to that player, right, we need to shift the whole pattern away from the heel, more towards the center, and then you have a bigger margin for error. If your average is now on the center, you can hit 10 millimeters heel and 10 millimeters toe and still have a good outcome.
You can be more inconsistent and play better.
Yeah, exactly. And I demonstrate that. I've had people with the concrete drill, draw the X on the concrete, hit the spot, and I make some swings demonstrating it. And I'll hit 1 inch behind, 1 inch in front, 1 inch behind, 1 inch in front, maybe one on the dot. So I got like a 2-inch range. And then I'll get a 15 handicap there, and they hit the same spot over and over to the point where I have to video it because I'm like, you're making the same chip here. Are you really? I can hear it, but I'm not seeing a different mark. And they're 3 inches behind or 4 inches behind. So they're hitting with a higher level of consistency than a pro. But it's just in the wrong place. They're doing the wrong things consistently. Right. So it's not always a consistency issue. Even if your outputs or your results of your shots are inconsistent, it doesn't mean that you are inconsistent.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. So with the fear thing, what do you do to overcome fear during a round of golf? I'm of the opinion that pretty much every mental game issue stems from fear on some. I think fear is at the bottom of all of it. So, and whether or not that's true, I don't know. But for you, What scares you when you play, and then how do you overcome that, or how have you overcome that?
I think going back to when I was younger, I was much more fearful on the golf course. And the fear was basically if I hit a bad shot or if I have a bad pattern today, then I'm ruined. Like if I
Mm.
snap hook the first one off the tee as a kid, I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what I'm going to do today because that's my pattern. Whereas now I'm not fearful of those things because I snap hook one off the tee. I'm like, okay, I can figure this out throughout the round. You know, my ability to do that might vary from day to day, but I can figure it out. Never stuck with the pattern. I do feel fear though on the golf course, much less so now though. And when I feel it, I know what my patterns tend to be. You know, I get cautious, my body slows down, the hands are more likely to overtake, so I'm more likely to miss it left. So whenever I sense this fear happening, I have one of two strategies. Either I say, right, I'm just going to commit to hitting this hard. So, you know, I'm going to go feel the fear and do it anyway, that book title. Or I'm just going to, if the fear is, if I feel like it's to the point where I'm not going to be able to control my body. You know, we've all been in those fight or flight states where we just cannot commit to something. And we know that no matter how much I tell myself, I'm going to commit to this, we're not as in control of our bodies as we think we are. So in that level of fear, I might be like, okay, this ball's probably going left based on my knowledge of my patterns when I feel this. So I'm going to do something to make it go less left. So I'm going to open the face at address. I'm going to aim at the right side of the green and just get through this. So those are my two strategies. The other thing I try to do as well, if I find myself getting too fearful, I think a lot of fear can come from taking on a task that doesn't match your ability. So maybe, you know, an example of that might be going 230 yards over water, and you know, deep down, you know, this has got a 50% chance of coming out. You have a right to be fearful there. Millions of years of evolution have gone into creating these mechanisms in us. It's telling you, it's giving you a message, don't do it.
Yeah.
But obviously that can come through sometimes when it's not the case. Like you could be a tour pro and you could know that, well, I can get this over 95% of the time, but why am I feeling so fearful of this? And obviously it's the situation itself. Often my tactic around that is to widen my my target area. So I know there's an adage in golf and other sports, like aim to as small a point as you can, and aim small, miss small is the thing for that. And I don't find that to be true always. For some people it is, but I perform better when I say I expand my target area. I say, okay, there's my target, middle of the fairway, but I'm going to allow myself to include the right rough and the left rough, and anywhere in that area is going to be acceptable for me. And that kind of frees me up then. I feel a lot less fear with that. If there's out of bounds on the left, I might bias that big pattern a little bit more to the right as well. So yeah, I think for me, understanding expectations as well has helped. You know, understanding as a kid, I would be angry at myself if I hit the right side of the fairway. So I was a super accurate driver, and I'd thin it a little bit and it'd hit the right side of the fairway. It wasn't perfect. But now I'm more like anything down there, even if I hit it in the rough, if I'm like, it's safe, it's fine. These are things that happen. You know, I tell people like actually an 8-finger target area, 4 fingers either side is pretty pro level with a driver. And when people see that, they're super surprised and they think, well, I can hit that and it's still an okay shot. And I'm like, yeah, some of those are going to be very close to out of bounds as well, but it's just what it is. There's only a certain level of control we can have. Unless you're Mo Norman, you're not going to be piping it down a 10-yard alleyway each time. The pros have, what does Scott Fawcett say, like a 60-yard, 70-yard target area effectively. People are very surprised at how offline pros can hit it. So understanding that can help alleviate some fear. It's like, I don't have to be perfect to play this game. Using good strategy, like I said, I always say to people, if there's out of bounds on the left, make sure you're at least 4 fingers away from it. And they're like, but that puts me aiming at the right side of the fairway. I'm like, yeah. But then I'm going to miss more shots to the right. And I'm like, yeah. That's not going to be in the out of bounds. If you're chipping out from the ref, that's a hell of a lot better than being out of bounds. So we have to play these things.
Yeah. Making mistakes more acceptable, I think, is the way to alleviate fear. And I think that's what you're describing is, okay, if I shift my pattern away from out of bounds, then I can make a mistake and still be fine. Right. So you lower the consequences of a mistake, right? So therefore there's less to be afraid of. Therefore I will probably not swing as afraid. So that's why opening up, I think helps. That makes a lot of sense.
And that applies in everything as well. Like someone who fears the shank. So you can say shank to me all day. I could stand over a ball and you could go shank, 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 shank. It doesn't bother me at all because my pattern is nowhere near a shank and I can adjust it. But actually an interesting party trick is I can make a backswing and someone calls out shank or toe and I can change it and hit that. Not super precisely, but just to show the power of intent.
Yeah.
But someone who does fear a shank, someone's like, don't even mention the word to me. Their pattern is heel biased. Their good shots are on the heel. And so they often don't have an inconsistency error. Again, it's just, look, your pattern, it's very rare, maybe at 1 in 100 person who I would see hit center, 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 random 20 millimeter shank. It just doesn't happen that often at all. It's there. I'm not going to deny it, but most people are like a shanker is going to be 15 millimeters heel every single time, and then it shifts another 8 millimeters, which is actually normal human variation, and that's where the shank pops out. If their average was more centered, just like you've got the out of bounds on the left and nothing on the right, centering things in a more acceptable area. Same thing, center your shot pattern on the face in an acceptable area. Center your ground contact in an acceptable area. So, you've seen the Divot Board, the training aid. So it basically highlights it's a better version of the concrete drill. It's not going to damage your club. And yeah, if I hit 100 shots on there, I'm going to have inch in front, inch behind. It's going to be that kind of range, that kind of spread. The average is right on the ball. My bad ones are an inch behind, bad ones are an inch in front. You might get another player whose their front side of their pattern is on the ball. So their best shots are as good as mine. And then their back pattern or their middle pattern is 1 inch behind. Again, it's all right. It's not bad. But the back side of their pattern is 2 inches behind. And then they lay the sod over it and say, I'm inconsistent. And I would say, well, no, I've got a 2-inch range. You've got a 2-inch range. In terms of consistency of inputs, it's the same. It's the location of the input that's the issue there.
Yeah.
So yeah, centering your shot patterns, centering the face contact patterns, centering all of these things. You can just say the pros are usually, in terms of consistency, they have a good average pattern. So they're centering everything in the right place. So center of the sweet spot, center of ground contact. So they've got a good center of their pattern. They also do have tighter ranges. I'm not going to lie. Like a pro is going to be more consistent as well as better. And then they're also using techniques that have higher margins for error. So if there is any variability in the machine, they can deal with it. So there's like 3 forms of consistency there. And then when they add on, not every pro has this, but when they add on strategic consistency as well, like a Scotty Scheffler, aiming for the middle of the green, that's another layer of consistency. So Scotty Scheffler has all of them. And that's when you become consistent, truly consistent. And then when you add on, there's a 5th layer of consistency, the ability to adapt when things go wrong, which is my forte.
Right.
Then those you've got so many layers of consistency there. And I am super consistent as a player. I can pick up a club once a month, and last year I played to a +3 with the yips. We won't talk about that, but actually maybe we will. But yeah, in terms of my long game is like a +5, playing once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Something like that. So, and I actually attribute that to my ability to adjust. I can wake up, I can say, I haven't played for 2 weeks, let's hit a few balls. Okay, everything's fat, toe and left. All right, I can adapt. Boom, let's go out.
Yeah.
So my ability to do that is what's key. Whereas when I was a kid, I'd have to practice 40 hours a week, because that's the other way around it, is if you hit enough balls, you will unconsciously tend to veer towards the right thing. That's what the pros do.
Right.
But not everybody will. I'm sure that listeners here will say, well, I put so much time and effort, I practiced 10 hours a week last year, every single week, and I got worse or didn't improve at all. So yeah, if you don't have the right processes in place, more practice doesn't always make you better.
Yeah. Yips. Tell me more.
Putting yips, yeah. It's not so yips is interesting. I wouldn't say I've ever experienced true yips because I've seen it with someone whose putting stroke is like,
Yep.
it looks like they've got Parkinson's as they're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
through. Yeah. And I've seen it to the point where you take the ball away and it's smooth. And then you put a ball and it judders. And so that's a level of yips that I'm not an expert in. You know, I certainly give strategies and I would certainly help with that player, but that's not my expertise. I've never experienced that, but I have got I'm awful at putting.
Okay.
The reason why is, as a kid, I never practiced putting at all because the greens that I used to play on were always awful. So my mindset was, why am I going to practice on this pinball machine? Oh, this Plinko. Is it Plinko where you drop something down and it goes random? Yeah, Plinko machine. Why am I going to practice on this putting Plinko? I'm just going to wait until I'm good enough playing in better tournaments and the green qualities are better. And then my practice, I know, will be attributed to whether I'm good or not. And I never got to that point. I never played on good greens. There aren't many in Britain because I didn't have the money to play on these top-end courses. And with the weather and traffic on golf courses in Britain, you just don't get good greens. So that's my excuse.
It's fair.
But yeah, so I've never historically been a good putter, but last year was notoriously frustrating for me because I hit the ball to a +5 level and then I was losing like 2 or 3 shots around just from putting. So I would go out and shoot like 3 under par, 4 under par, and look at my putting and I've made like 3 putts and missed a bunch of 8-footers. I'm like, this. Sometimes I walked off a round of golf and said, I could have shot a 59 today. And it's like, even with just a normal tour pro putting, not talking about a tour pro on a good day. That's rare. That's every time I go out.
Sure.
But it was very frustrating for me. And I'll be honest, you know, I talk about processes a lot. I didn't have a process for my putting. I was the epitome of what I dislike in long game. I would hit good putts and be like, okay, that was cool. And then I hit a bad putt and it would be like a blackout moment. Not through anger necessarily, but there wouldn't be any process there. It wouldn't be like, okay, why did I miss that putt? Was it left because I pulled it, or was it left because I didn't play enough break? Or was it a speed control thing? So, and again, the irony of this is I do teach my players to keep track of this stuff. I just wasn't doing it in my own game. So I just said, look, I gotta take note of this stuff. So I actually used Tangent. So I work with that app. I think they have a great app, and they have what I track in my putting, they have in there. So I was like, oh, actually I can do this on the watch. So after each putt, I'm basically, okay, that was left because I pulled it. Or that was low and left. And I started to find that, God, I'm hitting a lot of shots low, which was unusual for me because historically in the past, I'd always been a high putter because I read Peltz's book very early on in my career. And he talked about how everybody misses on the low side. So I went the other end of the spectrum, but somewhere that shifted and I didn't notice the pattern. So again, note, you know, we know what creates good putting, right? It's good start and good read. Then track these things. Because even at my level, I wasn't aware of them until I actually started to write them down or keep them in an app form. But I did have to dig a little bit deeper. Lots of players, like, what would you say was the most common suggestion to me? Because I was very open about this on the podcast and on social media. I would say, my putting sucks. What do you think everybody said to me? What was the suggestion? Yeah, new putter. Get a lab putter.
Lab putter.
Yeah. Or have you tried this with your technique? Have you tried left hand low? Have you tried the claw grip?
New grip.
But what is changing your technique changes how the ball starts.
Right.
Well, I then did a test. I got on a flat putt. I got a yoga mat, so I tested it, and it's very, very smooth, super smooth, better than most putting greens, most like golf specific training greens.
Right.
And so I practiced on this thing, and I said, right, I'm gonna video this and see how many in a row I can hold. So I set up a ghost hole, set up the video camera, and just started rolling these balls endlessly from 8 feet. and I think I got to about 240 putts after, and then my back gave out, and I holed 238 of them. And I'm a bad putter. Like,
Right.
that's not boastful, but that told me that it's not my stroke here. It's not my ability to start the ball on line. So then that leads into, okay, well, is it reading? And I got better at reading. So by understanding, okay, I'm missing a lot low, then I would start to read a little higher, and that improved it a little bit, but still not much. And the final reason that couldn't be tracked by the app was I was not committing to it, to what I was set out to do. So basically, I would read a putt, I would line my ball up, I would set up to it, and my brain would go, you're aimed too high here. Then I would adjust, hit it, and miss to decide that I adjusted. And again, I was doing that for maybe a year without realizing that pattern. So it was only when I started to break these things down a little bit more, and then say, whatever line I choose, no matter how uncomfortable it feels, I'm going to commit to that. And yes, I still missed putts with that, but at least I walked off and I was like, I have a consistent strategy here. And now I know that, okay, that missed low because I read it differently. I'm going to change for the next one. Because when I was adjusting and based on feel, there were just too many variables. It was hard to kind of pinpoint one thing. So the moment I started saying, right, I'm going to commit to my line, it's going to be a higher line. And if I miss it, I don't care as long as I committed to it. So it was a pure mental thing, really. And then my putting got a lot better throughout the year. Unfortunately, then for the last few rounds, the wind picked up in Vegas, which can be awful. So my long game went out the window and my putting went back. So it gave me a new vigor for this year. I'm like, I'm going to get my long game and my putting in shape. So hopefully that'll come to fruition.
I like there's a few, two, three, four possible reasons why this is bad. Let's systematically go through them. It's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Maybe it was a little bit this, but I got better at that, but I'm still missing it. It's got to, then what else does that leave? Well, it's maybe my commitment to my line. And that's usually, like you said, the final frontier, right? That's kind of the last thing that you will get to. But the way that you did it is a process that very few people do. They kind of, they'll go buy a new putter, right? Right. That's the first frontier, but then maybe they'll have the little honeymoon period for a while, but then it's right back to it. So the systematic process, which takes vulnerability, probably takes checking your ego a little bit, right? Well, maybe it is something about me, right? Or my effort. So what you're really good at is checking your ego and saying, okay, let's actually figure out what this is. And it might be something that I am bad at, and I want to know that, right? I don't want to be in the dark. So I love that process that you go through.
My brain is completely process oriented.
Yeah.
I love building process for everything. Like whatever problem there is, it's like, right, I want a step-by-step process. Okay, someone can't change their swing. Okay, here's a process for changing your swing. Let's take away context, take away the ball, make a simpler task, use a balloon instead of a golf ball, and gradually then layer on things. I have these processes. So when someone comes to me and they say, well, I've read your book, I know I should be doing this, I just can't seem to do it, I'll have within reason, an answer for that. It's interesting what you said about, most people, if they're putting bad, will go out and buy a new putter. Here's an irony, is that most people misread putts. Okay, if you get 100 golfers and you give them a putt that breaks like a foot, and you ask them where you're going to aim this, most people will give it about 3-4 inches or so. And that's why something like aim point is super good. It helps to give people a bigger read. But so if 90% or 70% of people are under reading break, which is what Peltz found in his statistics, the better you get at starting your ball online, the more putts you're going to miss. So if you had a putter that would roll, like say you give someone a robot that is absolutely rolling it perfectly online, that would make most people worse, not better, because they're going to be rolling it better at the wrong spot. So now whether over time they would then adjust it better is another thing. But I would hazard a guess that it wouldn't be as good an intervention as most people think it is. If you could ask a wave a magic wand and have this perfect putting stroke that starts the ball on line every time, I don't think it would have a positive effect, I think, but not as positive as most people would think, because they're the human elements here. Actually, in my process for finding out my issues, that was just the start, to roll a straight 8-foot putt over and over again, just to check, is it my stroke here that's the issue? The next layer was then to, okay, I'm going to randomize this a little bit. I'm going to go to the left side of the mat, then the right side of the mat, then this corner. So I was actually walking around. So that started to challenge my ability to set up and line everything up and get set up with my body consistently. And so I did see a drop off. It went from 238 out of 240 to something like 220, 210 as a percentage. I didn't hit that many putts with it, but it dropped off. So it showed me, okay, maybe I can improve my alignment a little bit better as well, but it's probably not the biggest issue here. Then I started checking my reads. So I got one of those devices. I know Y Golf have them now, but I bought the Peltz version of it. So it's a little board. You place it on, and there are 2 ball bearings on the side. So basically, if you can roll it through that, you're good. So I had no worries rolling through. I could do that just 100 times out of 100. And then when I stuck myself on a slope, I would line that thing up to where I think the ball would need to start. Then I could hit the putt. And now I could ascertain what the fault was. If I rolled it through the ball bearings, I knew it wasn't a stroke issue. And then the outcome would tell me, did I hit it too hard or soft? Or was it then too high or low? So now I could make the adjustment. Whereas obviously if I made a putt and I hit the ball bearings, I knew, oh, that was a stroke issue. And for sometimes, it's really interesting how people respond to different environments. We had David Orr on our podcast and he talks about this. But you can get a player who can roll through that gate 100 times, maybe 100% success rate. Then you stick them on a slope and their success rate, their stroke goes out the window. Just the act of being on the slope, whether from a conscious or unconscious level, they start pulling it, pushing it. And so, yeah, these things are important to ascertain. For me, that wasn't the issue. I still had the same ability to roll it through the gate, but I saw that, yeah, my reads were super low. So, and when I was even standing over the gate, I was like, oh God, this feels really awful. So that started to trigger to me, oh, maybe I'm not committing to my lines as well. So I eventually got to the right answer through this step-by-step process, basically stripping down putting into all its different layers and starting with the most logical layer, is it my stroke? And then layering on from there to see, okay, it wasn't a stroke, maybe it's my ability to line up. Okay, it's not my ability to line up, maybe it's my ability to read, maybe it's my ability to produce that same stroke on a slope, maybe it's my speed, maybe it's now my commitment to what I'm doing. And I eventually got to the right answer. Still need to practice. I wouldn't consider myself a good putter by any means, but I got closer to the right answer over time.
I think by the end of this, I come to the conclusion that maybe good technique is self-knowledge, self-awareness, knowing your own game. That's, I don't know. What do you think of that definition?
Yeah, I always say that I don't teach golf swings. I teach processes. I teach people and I teach processes, which I know sounds cheesy and cliche. I can teach a golf swing, but golf swing to me is just a part of a process, and it's a tool in a much larger toolbox. I want to teach people. I want to take people through those layers that I talked about. Do they understand what creates a good shot? Can they identify what they're actually doing? What tools do they have? What control over the tools they have? And then how are they implementing that in the battleground? That's how you build a player. Technique is such a small part of that when you think about it. And this is from a player who was a swing junkie and absolutely swing obsessed when I was a kid. I thought the answer was in positions. And I'm still a swing junkie. If you wanted to have a podcast on, backswing theory and forces and torques, I would eagerly talk about that as well. But when I'm thinking about how can I get a player to not only play better, but what seeds can I sow so that when they go off on their own, they're going to have their own growth as well. And that comes from processes. Like I said, if I had to drop someone on a desert island and tell them two things, it would be hit this X and control where the face is looking. Simple rule of more left the face is, the more left the result is, and vice versa. I know I could come back and that player would have self-organized into something decent. And that's just one of the tools that I can give a player.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Where would you send people? What do you want to sell to people? Where do you want people to go to find you or whatever else?
Well, I can sell them a bunch of my free stuff. So we do a podcast, the Sweet Spot podcast. That's with my partner John.
Great
my
podcast.
golf partner. Yeah, it's really good. It was good blend because I go down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
John likes to he's very good at keeping things simple.
Great
and
balance.
I ultimately want to. Simplicity is always my goal, right? It's hit this spot with a good club face. That's golf to me. Everything else, I'm like, what are the million ways that I can do to improve that task with a player? So I always want to bring it back to that simplicity. But as an instructor, I might have this huge knowledge base of what I can do to manipulate that. So yeah, I mean, simple stuff. You can go on social media, podcasts. We have a lot of in-depth topics as well. And then my premium programs, if you want to bypass all the searching and just find, right, what would Adam do with me? It's the strike plan, accuracy plan on my website. .com. I have other programs there. You can work with me directly as well. I've got a book on Amazon, the practice manual. That's actually its 10th anniversary today.
No way. Today?
Yeah,
Happy
10th
anniversary. Wow.
From releasing it. Yeah, I can't believe it. Yeah, and it's still floating around in the top 10, 20 every time I look at it. So yeah, it's a dream come true that people would want to read my work. But yeah.
Okay. Well, good stuff. You improve the golf industry like you want to do. So thank you. Thank you for being part of the golf industry, and thank you for being on the Mental Golf Show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Yeah, man.